Thank you for logging onto Dicentra's Regulatory Update webinar for the third quarter of 2011. Given the ever-changing regulatory climate surrounding natural health products, these webinars are meant to be a non-biased source of education and information for the dietary supplement and natural health product industries. Just a little bit about Dicentra before we get started. Dicentra is a leading international regulatory and scientific consulting firm with expertise in bringing product concepts to realization in the marketplace. Our areas of specialty are in dietary supplements, natural health products, foods, beverages, cosmetics, and OTCs. If you'd like to learn more about our services or contact us, please visit our website at www.dicentra.com. You can also email us at info@dicentra.com or call toll-free at 1-866-647-3279 or locally at 416-361-3400. Now, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Lydia Hunziker, and I'm the Manager of Communications and Client Services at Dicentra. I'll be going over some general items today with you and introducing our speakers. There will be no question and answer period as there are over 200 attendees logging in. However, we do want to receive your feedback. At the end of the presentation, you will receive a link to a short customer satisfaction survey, which we hope you will fill out. It'll only take a few minutes. Given that this webinar is free and for the benefit of the industry, we want to make sure that these presentations are delivering valuable information, so your feedback is critical. Please note this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our website at www.dicentra.com in a few days. At that time, you'll be able to review it at your leisure. So let's get started. It is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Ms. Ann Wilkie, the Senior Regulatory Strategy and Policy Advisor at Dicentra. Ann helps her clients develop leading regulatory strategies and often communicates with government bodies to solve our clients' most challenging regulatory issues. Please join me in welcoming Ann Wilkie.
Thank you, Lydia, and good afternoon. It always surprises me every time I come to put these regulatory webinar updates together at the amount of new information that there is out there in the field. However, this just confirms that our regulatory environment that we are working in is ever-changing and emphasizes the need for us to stay current. We at Dicentra believe that it is part of our mandate as well as our responsibility to help keep stakeholders up to date. The objectives of today's webinar, therefore, are to provide you with up-to-date information pertaining to the implementation and interpretation of the natural health products regulations in Canada. So we'll be looking at various policies and guidelines and consultations that are ongoing. We'd also like to provide you with other scientific and regulatory information that has relevance to the natural health products industry. So depending on the environment, we'll be looking at topics of interest in the EU, in Australia, in the United States, as well as looking at food policies closer to home as they may impact the natural health products industry. And as well, starting today with a new feature, we will be introducing you to a guest speaker who will be providing you with a unique perspective on current regulatory issues. So every time I do this, I always say for the next 30 minutes. We never make 30 minutes, so for the next little while, this is what we're going to be talking about. We'll be discussing the current regulatory environment in Canada. We'll have a look at the recently published Status of Applications quarterly report. We'll look at changes in product and ingredient information, and there has been a lot ongoing in that category. As well, many of you may be aware that the Minister of Health, Minister Aglakak, just held a media conference regarding energy beverages, so we'll be talking about that as well. We'll be looking at consultations and regulatory initiatives, and as I mentioned, we'll also look at food initiatives before we move to the United States and hear from our guest speaker on the new dietary ingredients guidance document. So in terms of the current regulatory environment, we're all agreed that it is forever changing. It is not a very stable environment, particularly at the moment, as we've seen with recent Section 16 notices and IRNs that are coming out quite quickly. But right now, the key policies, guidelines, regulations that are guiding us in our everyday work environment are the application management policy, the natural health products unlicensed product license application regulations, and the current compliance and enforcement policy. So key points with regards to the application management policy. Again, it came into effect on August the 5th, 2010, and basically outlines responsibilities for stakeholders as well as the government in submitting product license applications. The key points are that applications are now reviewed according to whether they attest to pre-cleared information, so pre-approved information such as monographs and abbreviated labeling standards, or whether they are supported by non-pre-cleared information, so independent evidence. Particular to this, if you are attesting to pre-cleared information, then there is a performance target of 60 days for the government to review your application. And if you're looking at non-pre-cleared information, it's a performance target of 180 days. So this is a benefit to the industry. The NHPD is making good progress in adhering to their performance standards. One concern with the application management policy is the requirement to have all your ingredients, whether they be medicinal or non-medicinal, listed in the ingredient database prior to submitting your applications. Some of the things that are coming out, it's taking a long time, number one, to get ingredients listed in the database. There are also challenges sometimes in meeting the evidence requirements, whether substantiating that a product actually has a non-medicinal function or that it should be defined as a natural health product and a medicinal ingredient. There's also some challenges, too, that we're seeing with regards to proprietary information. We've already gone through this with the establishment of the regulations and the requirement to put all the quantities of the medicinal ingredients on the label. So industry has looked to ways to maintain some competitive edge in the marketplace and maybe has been able to put some ingredients into the non-medicinal categories. But there are some proprietary formulations out there. One now is the cryoprotectant blends for probiotics and the requirement to disclose these ingredients. Many companies have spent a large amount of time, dollars, resources in coming up with specific blends that will give them a competitive edge, and now they're being requested to reveal those on the product labels. So as we deal with one issue, there's always multitudes of other issues coming up. So this is one thing I think we need to look at a bit more closely and how industry can maintain a competitive edge. Product categories on hold. We're seeing some movement here, most recently with regards to probiotics and enzymes, though I think we could probably all agree that what has come out in terms of the Natural Health Products Directorate position is not necessarily what we would have liked to have seen. And as well, as I say, there has been some movement on energy beverages, and we'll talk about all three categories a bit later on. The Natural Health Products Unlicensed Product License Application Regulations, more simply known as UPLAR, is the regulation that will give you an exemption number and make your product legal for sale pending the final evaluation, as if the government has not managed to review your application within 180 days of receipt. So the challenges with the exemption numbers, products with exemption numbers, of which there's approximately 10,000 listed in the exempted products database. There are no performance standards associated with the review of these applications other than February 2013, which is when the regulations will be sunsetted. So some companies have looked at resubmitting their applications so that they come in after the August 5th date and then are subjected to performance standards. As well, you cannot get international trade certificates for export markets if you only have an exemption number. But again, there is some movement in the review of these applications, those with exemption numbers, and you do see changes in the exempted product database from valid exemption numbers to licensed, and unfortunately in some cases too, the exemption numbers no longer being valid. The other policy that we're working with is the current compliance and enforcement policy, and as you're aware, there is no firm date set yet as to when full enforcement of the regulations will occur. So we can still go to market with a submission number, provided there are no risks associated with the product, as well as with exemption numbers and product licenses. So there's definitely a lot of flux in the regulatory environment and lots of ongoing changes. Other changes we've seen are in terms of the leadership within the Natural Health Products Directorate. Scott Seller became the third Director General at the end of 2010. A lot of changes have been happening within the Natural Health Products Directorate, though whether they can be attributed to Scott's presence or just that they were ready to be published when any happened to come on at the same time, we still don't know. Scott has been fairly visible within the industry, and he does have a couple of presentations planned in the next couple of weeks. He will be at Supply Side West in Las Vegas next week, speaking to the board of the International Probiotic Association, obviously speaking to the revised product monograph and the abbreviated labeling standard. So there is concern with the impact of this not only in Canada, but in the United States and other jurisdictions. As well, Scott is expected to be at the Canadian Health Food Association Expo East this coming Thursday, again, to talk about the Canadian regulatory environment. Another new member, though not so new at the moment, is Michael Wiseman. He has been on an executive exchange from the Therapeutic Goods Administration in Australia for the past year, working on the risk-based site licensing assessment system. He has recently, or is in the process of moving on to another position within the Natural Health Products Directorate, having had his term extended. So the most recent changes, we've seen Adam Gibson become the Senior Executive Director within the Bureau of Product Review and Assessment. This position was previously held by Don Boyer. Don was quite visible and receptive to industry in his position, but he has returned to his home base of medical devices. So Adam is coming to us from the Food Directorate, and it would appear in exchange that Nancy Richards, who was previously an Executive Director within the Natural Health Products Directorate, she has moved over to be a Senior Executive Director within the Director General's Office of the Food Directorate. So whether this is going to make any impact on files moving forward, and specifically the food-like NHPs, remains to be seen, but it's interesting that we are getting different inputs into the Natural Health Products Directorate, some from Australia, some from the Food Directorate. So we'll just have to wait and see how this all pans out in the future. So we'll have a brief look at the Status of Applications Quarterly Report. This is a publication put out every quarter by the Natural Health Products Directorate to report to stakeholders on their progress in the licensing of applications for products, site licenses, and clinical trials. So this is quarter one in the government's book, is from April 1st to June 30th. This is the most recent report coming out for quarter one, as I say, ending on June the 30th. So this gives the total number of product license applications received since the inception of the regulations in January 1st, 2004. So the right-hand column are the numbers to the end of the first quarter compared to the numbers on the left, which were at the end of the last quarter, the fourth quarter. So as you can see, we're continuing to get more new applications coming in to the Natural Health Products Directorate, an increase of about 2,500 over last quarter. Again, whether this is actually brand new applications coming in or whether this is the result of companies resubmitting old applications to take advantage of performance standards, or whether they're being forced to submit a revised application because of changes in the regulatory environment, i.e. related to oil of oregano or probiotics or enzymes, or else they're just reviewing or revising applications that have been in queue so long that they are no longer relevant. But it is interesting to note that, again, we are getting more new applications coming in. So of those applications received to date, approximately 85% of them have been completed. Again, completed means either a license has been issued, a license has been refused, or the application has been withdrawn by the applicant. So in terms of the product license applications completed, we have about 55% of them resulting in licenses. So this number has been fairly consistent since the inception of the regulations, again, about a 50% licensing rate. We're moving up slightly to about 55%, but still it's not the best average. The other important point here, again, companies with product licenses, again, there's approximately 75 new companies that have got a product license within the last quarter. So again, hopefully these are companies that are new to the Canadian market and not just companies that have been dragging their feet and not gotten a product license application. So really, independent of the changing regulatory environment, Canada still continues to attract new business as the number of PLAs continues to increase and the number of companies getting product licenses increases as well. Again, when we're talking about the status of applications report, the NHPD is now reporting their activities in terms of applications submitted prior to the implementation of the unprocessed product license applications regulations and those submitted after, so the cutoff date being August 5th. So in terms of applications received prior to August 5th, 2010, there's approximately 11,000 applications and approximately 30% have been completed or in the process of being completed. As mentioned before, there are no performance targets associated with the review of these applications. The only deadline that they need to meet is February 13th, 2013, when the regulations will be sunsetted if they are not indeed extended. So as mentioned, if you look at the exempted products database, and all of these applications will now have an exemption number if the applicant applied for one. There is some movement in terms of licensing of some of these products, as well as exemption numbers becoming not valid, unfortunately. The other important thing to note is that almost 30% of the applications that were received prior to August 5th, 2010 are on hold. Again, this is pending internal decisions on safety and efficacy by the Natural Health Products Directorate. So next quarter, this should decrease slightly because probiotics and enzymes were on the held category, and policies have now come out respecting how they can move forward. But again, 30% is still a significant number of applications on hold. If we look at the applications that were received after the implementation of UPLAR, again, approximately 10,000 applications have been received since August 5th, 2010. These applications are subject to performance standards, again, whether they are attesting to pre-cleared information, which is a 60-day turnaround, or non-pre-cleared information, which is 180 days turnaround. So as you can see, it's almost 50-50 in terms of the applications, whether they attest to pre-cleared information or other independent evidence. In meeting the performance targets, you can see that there is an emphasis put on this area by the Natural Health Products Directorate, and that they are almost at 100% in terms of meeting either the initial assessment, the 30-day initial assessment, or the 60-day or 180-day performance standards. Applications that are on hold obviously will have an effect and not allow them to be 100% in line with their performance targets. However, I think we might be looking at some decrease in meeting of these performance targets next quarter, just given the large number of IRNs and Section 16 notices that are coming out. So if there's not an increase in resources within the NHPD, there's going to be a shifting of resources, and these numbers, performance targets, may suffer. Just some numbers in terms of site licensing, which is also reported in the quarterly report. The key takeaway with this is really that new companies are continuing to enter the Canadian market. And you can see this by the 45 new site license applications that were received during quarter one. So it may be for packaging, labeling, importing, and or manufacturing, but still there's 45 new applications in one quarter, which I would say is fairly significant. The other interesting figure here is with regards to clinical trials. So again, since the inception of the regulations in January of 2004, the Natural Health Products Directorate has received 347 clinical trial applications. Of that, 93% are completed, so 322 have been completed, and 277 of those have received notices of authorization. So there are 277 clinical trials either ongoing or that have been completed, which is about an 86% success rate in getting a notice of authorization. And again, during quarter one, 15 new applications, clinical trial applications, were received by the Natural Health Products Directorate. So I think this is emphasizing the importance that industry is starting to see in doing their own independent research. If you attach to preclinical information, you're going to have similar claims to your competitor. You need to disclose your formula on the label. You need to have a method to distinguish your product in the marketplace. And doing independent proprietary research is one of those ways. So looking at unique claims for your products. So as I say, there seems to be an increased interest in clinical trials being conducted by industry. And again, going back to the oil of oregano situation, the enzymes, the probiotics, if companies want to keep a lot of these products on the market, they are going to be forced to do independent research. So this, as I mentioned before, the product and ingredient information, this is where we have seen a significant amount of activity within the last quarter. The first topic is in terms of oil of oregano, a significant product category within the natural products sector. Recent changes were made in the acceptable levels of use of oil of oregano. So previously, if you remember, you could use up to 100 milligrams per day of oil of oregano as a non-medicinal ingredient. However, in July of this year, those levels were significantly reduced. So the acceptable level for a non-medicinal purpose for oil of oregano was reduced to 0.27 micrograms per kilogram body weight per day, and correspondingly, the acceptable level of carvacrol, which is the active medicinal within the oil of oregano, was reduced to 0.23 micrograms per kilogram body weight per day. So these are significant reductions in the acceptable levels of use of oil of oregano, specifically as a non-medicinal ingredient. And when these changes came out, if you looked at the exempted products database, approximately 50% of the exemption numbers that were given to products containing oil of oregano became not valid within the database. So obviously a result of changes in the levels, acceptable levels of NMIs. So within late August, early September, Section 16 notices as well as IRNs were starting to be received by industry. Within these information requests, the NHPD was looking to find out the quantity per dosage unit of Oreganum vulgaris sourced from the leaf oil, as well as the amount of carvacrol. So this is now required to be put on the product license application. If your product has a daily dose of carvacrol of 15.4 micrograms or less, then there's no safety concern and no additional action is required. However, which is probably the case with the majority of products, if your daily dose of carvacrol is greater than or equal to 15.4 micrograms, it's considered to be a medicinal ingredient and you need to prove safety. So why is this happening? Obviously, oil of oregano is a product that's in demand by consumers. They're using this product. They have a level of confidence in its safety as well as its efficacy. We've looked at sales figures. Oil of oregano accounted for approximately $4 million in sales in the United States alone in 2010. And interestingly enough, this is a decrease of 11% from the previous year when fears about H1N1 flu were surfacing. So consumers were obviously looking for self-medication at that time and continue to look at oil of oregano as a valuable product. However, according to the government, they were identifying that there were potential safety concerns with oil of oregano and specifically carvacrol content, that there was information that they felt they needed and didn't have access to. But if we look at the big picture, this product has been in the marketplace for many, many years now. Minimal adverse events. We were only able to find 3 adverse events associated with an oil of oregano product in the Canadian database over the last 45 years. And neither one of those, or either of those 3 events could be confirmed to be related to the oil of oregano. There are other medications involved. So right now we have what appears to be sort of a large uncontrolled clinical trial going on. consumers convinced of its efficacy, as demonstrated by the sales figures, lack of adverse events, so no safety issues. Nothing's happening in other jurisdictions. It's freely sold as a dietary supplement in the United States. It's on the acceptable ingredients for listed medicines in Australia. So Canada right now is taking action on its own. So next steps, the NHPD says these are just exploratory actions on their part, that they don't anticipate any immediate compliance actions. However, they want to see evidence from industry to support the safety of their products. We at Dicentra have done extensive research, submitted all the available information that we can find and that we truly believe is out there, and it's still not meeting NHPD's requirements. So it's looking like there's going to be a need for preclinical and clinical trials to be done. In the absence of any new and emerging evidence, industry will most likely have to reformulate their products to the new levels specified for non-medicinal ingredients. So just some thoughts out there. Either independent research by companies is going to have to be taken. Maybe industry can band together, but we're hoping for continued dialogue with the Natural Health Products Directorate. And as I say, no immediate enforcement actions are anticipated. So the next category, and again, as mentioned, probiotics were on hold. As of September 14th, we've got guidance on how to move forward with these types of products. So again, this information was communicated to industry via a BEEP, which is the Natural Health Products Directorate's electronic communication system. We were advised at that time that the monograph for probiotics had been revised and that a new abbreviated labeling standard for live microorganisms had been published. Again, this goes back to the Natural Health Products Directorate identifying information gaps regarding efficacy, stability, strain identification, and transferable antibiotic resistance in non-compendial applications that they were receiving. So they decided that industry needed clearer guidance in terms of the type of information that was required, type of evidence for both compendial and non-compendial applications, and as well that guidance, clearer guidance was required around the use of the term probiotic. So if we look at the revisions to the monograph, this was initially published in April of 2009, so it's been out there just over 2 years and used by industry. It now has been revised to include only those strains that have claims that can be supported with strain-specific evidence. So we are down to now 2 strains of Lactobacillus johnsoni, 1 strain of Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG, and 1 strain of Saccharomyces boulardii that are found in the monograph. They all have strain-specific claims associated with their use and their dosages. General claims that were previously found in the monograph to the effect of a probiotic that forms part of or contributes to healthy gut flora can only be used as a supplemental claims on compendial applications. It cannot be a standalone claim. So for your monograph, your compendial applications, you will have a strain-specific claim, and then if you want, you can have the supplemental general claim. With the abbreviated labeling standard for live microorganisms, again, this takes into account most of the other species that had been previously listed on the monograph. So there are now 19 species of bacteria or live microorganisms listed in the abbreviated labeling standards, primarily of the genus Bifidobacterium, Lactobacillus, and Streptococcus. However, attesting to the abbreviated labeling standard, you cannot use the terms probiotic or prebiotic, and the only claim that you can make is to temporarily modify gut flora. So significant changes from what existed before. So again, in response to these revisions to the monograph and the publications of the abbreviated labeling standard, Section 16 notices and IRNs are being issued to the industry. Key in both of these is the requirement of the applicant to attest to the absence of transferable antibiotic resistance. So this is the first thing that you need to respond to the NHPD to if you have received a Section 16 notice or an IRN regarding your probiotic application or license. Again, with IRNs, Responding to them is you have 30 days. Section 16 notices if you need to provide additional evidence, you have 90 days to respond. So industry needs to be looking at their product formulations and how they compare to the compendial, the revised monograph, as well as to the abbreviated labeling standard. Also take note that some of the dosage forms have been changed within the monograph and labeling standard for some of the subpopulations. But again, there is still the opportunity to go the non-compendial route if you do have strain-specific evidence. So again, in terms of moving forward, you do need to look at your product formulations and the available evidence that you have. If you can make it fit to the compendial application, to the monograph, that would be your first route. In the absence of that, you can go to the abbreviated labeling standard, though you will be looking at a significantly reduced claim. And if neither of those options work, then you still have the option of going the non-compendial route and providing strain-specific evidence for your bacteria. The Food Directorate also came out with similar guidance in terms of the use of probiotics in food products a couple of years back. Word has it that they are also looking at moving towards strain-specific claims on food products. Changes have not yet come out of the Food Directorate, but that is the intent that we've been made aware of. So in general, what does this mean for industry? Well, obviously it's going to mean a lot of work and a lot of headaches. We're looking at a significant reduction in the available claims. They say there's only 4 strains that have strain-specific claims permitted by the monograph. If you do have strain-specific evidence for other strains, then you are free to submit that to the NHPD, and hopefully it will meet their expectations for safety and efficacy. Otherwise, you're looking at the abbreviated labeling standard with a claim of temporarily modified gut flora. What this will mean to consumers is anybody's guess. It's a pretty wishy-washy claim, though it is a claim. So again, you have 1 year to reformulate and or relabel your products. Based on the NHPD's response, they did issue another BEEP, an electronic communication yesterday, in my mind, just justifying the positions that they have taken in terms of probiotics and enzymes. So I imagine that they're getting a lot of flack from the industry in terms of the revisions that they've made and the positions that they've taken. So again, this is what we're looking at this point in time. So complying with the revised monograph, complying with the abbreviated labeling standard, or submitting your own strain-specific evidence. And just a reminder, if you're attesting to the abbreviated labeling standard, you need to submit finished product specifications as well as revisions to the product license application, and you cannot use the term probiotic or prebiotic. You're now talking about live microorganisms. And again, these are references where you can find the revised monograph, the labeling standard, and as well the current guidance for the use of probiotic microorganisms in food. The other category that was subjected to recent changes, and again, probably unwanted changes by the industry, is the category of enzymes. Again, this information was transmitted to industry via BEEP on September 14th of this year, again, relating to safety and efficacy deficiencies identified by the Natural Health Products Directorate. First concern was in terms of evidence of safety of long-term use of enzymes was not available, and also a lack of efficacy data to support the actions of certain of the enzymes. So the NHPD moved forward. They have published abbreviated labeling standards for pancreatic enzymes, stem bromelain, fruit bromelain, papain, fungal proteases, amylase, lipase, cellulase, alpha-galactosidase, trypsin, and chymotrypsin. And these are in addition to the already existing abbreviated labeling standard for lactase. So the ones above with a star beside them, the abbreviated labeling standard encompasses both safety and efficacy, whereas for the other ones, the abbreviated labeling standard will only support safety. So again, the website where you can find these abbreviated labeling standards The key with this is that long-term use is not supported for any of these enzymes, the concern being that they may decrease natural enzyme production. So you will be required to put a duration of use of a maximum of 3 days on your enzyme-containing products. The only exemption to this is lactase, that is used for lactose intolerance. There is no duration of use to be applied to this unless it is combined with other enzymes, and then you are at the maximum duration of use of 3 days. So, as I say, the NHPD did come out with a beep yesterday justifying their position and saying that this information was brought together by a working group that they had convened. They approached the Enzyme Technical Association as well as an independent naturopath, and this is the position they came up with. So you are able to find their background documentation. I'm not sure if it's on the website at the moment or not. So again, with enzymes, in terms of next step, Section 16 notices and IRNs have been issued. Industry is in the process of replying to them. There is a need for you to review your formulations, see if they are consistent with the abbreviated labeling standard. Can you attest to the abbreviated labeling standard? If so, you will need to submit the revisions in terms of the PLA, as well as finished product specifications to the Natural Health Products Directorate. If they do not conform to the ABLS, you will at least need to submit safety if you're able to use it as a non-medicinal ingredient, and safety and efficacy if you're using the enzymes as medicinal ingredients. Again, enforcement, we've been told, is not a priority, and there is the opportunity to reformulate and relabel within 12 months. So for both probiotics and enzymes, whatever changes are required, you have up to a year to do, but next label run, next formulation, or a year maximum. Again, going back to the clinical trials, this may be an area that industry is going to be looking at with the enzymes and probiotics in the absence of other evidence that's out there that they can submit to substantiate safety and efficacy. You may be required to do clinical trials to support your product and to keep it on the market. A few additional comments. You may be able to get extensions for responses to Section 16 notices and IRNs, and this will go for both probiotics and enzymes. They are being reviewed on a case-by-case basis, so you need to talk to the submission coordinator if you do need an extension. To say the duration of use will be required for multi-ingredient products. So if you've got enzymes in there, it's going to be 3 days maximum. And submissions that remove enzymes for the formulation, which is another option that you have, if they currently have an EN, you can retain that EN by removing the enzymes, and they will be moved forward as soon as possible since they have been on hold for a significant amount of time. So going back to products currently on hold, and as we saw, there are a significant number of applications on hold. Right now we're looking at weight loss, weight management products are still on hold, energy beverages, natural health products in food format, and aromatherapy products. But again, you're still eligible for an exemption number for these applications as long as you don't meet any of the risk criteria. So the enzymes and probiotics have come off since last time. The big news of today is the press conference I mentioned earlier that Minister Aglakak held at 12:15 today, speaking to energy beverages. So there was a Health Canada expert panel on caffeinated drinks convened to look at the issue of energy beverages, caffeinated beverages, etc. This issue has been brewing for a number of years now. A couple of provinces, Prince Edward Island as well as British Columbia, they had looked independently at how to regulate the sale of energy beverages within their own provinces, and nothing really moved forward. So now we're looking at it at the federal level. The expert panel on caffeinated drinks was quite radical in their conclusions. They had suggested that these energy beverages should be called stimulant drug-containing drugs, and that they should only be sold in pharmacies under the supervision of a pharmacist. Obviously, this is another important category in the natural products sector and industry, and I'm sure consumers alike didn't all take kindly to these recommendations. So what came out of the press conference today with Minister Aglakak? She was promoting a balanced approach. We have learned that energy beverages are now going to be considered as food products. They are no longer going to be natural health products. They are now back to the food category. There will be a maximum level of caffeine permitted in these types of products. It has been suggested that it'll be around 180 milligrams per serving. This is fairly significant compared to Coke, which looks to be around 38 milligrams per serving. The challenge will be with the vitamins, minerals, and amino acids that have been added. Currently, there is no provision to add these types of nutrients to this type of food product. So how the minister will deal with that, there may be an interim marketing authorization, maybe one route that they want to go. The other thing is that warnings will need to be put on these energy beverages as foods, one not to consume with alcohol, and the other not suitable for pregnant women and children. So the word is that these changes are to be phased in gradually, but as I say, currently the regulatory framework for foods will not permit the current formulation of these energy beverages. So if any of you caught the press conference, I think you could see that the minister was being hounded from both sides from not going far enough in terms of the action she was proposing and going too far. So we'll stay tuned and we'll keep you posted with additional information as it becomes available. In terms of monographs, we'll move through this quickly. There have been revised monographs for arnica and published that differentiates between arnica taken topically and arnica in semi-solid dosage forms, and those are the web links where you can find these monographs. And as well, the abbreviated labeling standard that did exist for marigold extract and lutein have been replaced by a monograph entitled Marigold Extract and Isolates. So the monograph is not yet posted, but we can supply it to you if you are interested. It did come out in the BEEP communication. Consultations and regulatory initiatives. The ongoing one right now is with regards to site licensing and GMPs. A concept paper was put out by the Natural Health Products Directorate looking at a new risk-based approach to site licensing. This concept paper discussed the current situation and proposed changes to both the site licensing model, good manufacturing practices, and the information that's required to be provided at the time of your product license application. The consultation does run from August 29th to October 28th, and you do have the opportunity to submit your comments to the Natural Health Products Directorate. They are currently in the process of conducting information sessions coast to coast. In Toronto, we just had one on the 29th of September. Vancouver was on the 4th, on Tuesday, and Halifax actually was this morning, and there is a webinar next October 12th. So if you weren't able to attend any of the workshops, you can check out the NHPD's website and find out the information in terms of the webinar. So this review of the site licensing and GMPs is all sparked by the need to have an on-site audit, which is something that the NHPD has looked at for a while and which would put natural health products on par with other categories and other regulatory jurisdictions where there is a requirement for on-site audits for licensing and the maintenance of your license. So again, proposed changes, the key ones are the requirement for the evidence of an on-site audit to get your license and to have it renewed. They're looking at separating the categories into sterile and non-sterile products. So if you're manufacturing a sterile product or importing it, Health Canada or another recognized competent authority would have to do the audit. For a non-sterile product, Health Canada, recognized third-party audit, or another recognized competent authority. And if you've gone to any of the workshops, you'll see that they don't have all the details hammered out. They have sort of the big picture proposal, but they have not, or if they have, they're not willing to disclose the more detailed requirements of their proposal. Again, there will be the same requirements for offshore facilities to be audited. by competent authorities or approved third-party audits. And again, this all requires amendments to the natural health products regulations, so this is not something that's going to happen overnight. You're probably looking at 2 to 3 years minimum down the road. Again, changes to site licensing renewals. 3 years is being proposed for manufacturers, packagers, labelers, and importers of non-sterile products and importers of sterile products, and a 2-year renewal phase for manufacturers, packagers, and labelers of sterile products. So again, this is something, even though it may not take place for another couple of years, something that you should be interested in and submit your comments before the end of October. Another survey that is ongoing, it's a web-based survey of Health Canada regulated businesses and industry associations with regards to BSE and TSE and the actions that Health Canada, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada are taking currently to minimize and manage the risks associated with these diseases. So this was a targeted consultation. Email invitations were sent to specific participants. So if you were invited to participate, I strongly encourage you, again, to submit your comments. Moving on to food initiatives. And again, we're looking at these just as they might potentially have an impact on the natural health product sector. We've seen in a lot of cases that the NHPD does reference food policies. There was a webinar on October 4th of this week put on by the Food Regulatory Issues Division of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada and the Food Directorate of Health Canada, talking about the new regulatory amendments for food allergen labeling. So this is important, particularly if you're a food manufacturer, but something to be aware of as it may extend to natural health products down the road. So these amended regulations will be in force effective August 4th, 2012. At that time, it's expected that all products will be in compliance. So there may need to be a requirement for over-stickering, but your product, if it is on the store shelf as of August 4th, 2012, it will need to comply with the new regulations. So again, regulations for allergen labelings. There are the priority food allergens have been amended to include mustard seeds, so that's something to be aware of, as well as new requirements for the labeling of gluten sources and added sulfites. So this webinar was held on October 4th, but a podcast and all supporting documents are available to industry for the next year. Unfortunately, the web link I have there is not the current one, so we will make sure that we have the viable link posted, and you can go on and hear the webcast and look at the supporting documents at your leisure. So I will turn this back to Lydia for the next part of our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. Now it's my pleasure to introduce a very special guest speaker for our presentation today, Mr. Steve Mister, President of the Council for Responsible Nutrition, or CRN. The CRN is the leading trade association representing dietary supplement manufacturers and ingredient suppliers in the United States. To learn more about the CRN, please visit www.crnusa.org. For today's presentation, Steve will address the recent FDA guidance document on new dietary ingredients and explain the major points of controversy, the implications for industry, and its response. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Steve Mister.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to talk about the new dietary ingredient guidance. It is certainly something that is getting an awful lot of attention here in the U.S., and I'm sure many Canadian manufacturers are watching it as well. So I guess the big question here is, why should we care? What is everybody talking about? The new dietary ingredient draft guidance was issued on July 5th this past summer. It is a guidance document, and we'll talk a little bit in a minute about what that means. But if we start with the statutory regime in which dietary supplements can be sold in the U.S., we start with a basic premise that DSHEA created a distinction between what they called old dietary ingredients and new dietary ingredients. old dietary ingredients were those ingredients that were on the market on October 15, 1994, which was the date of passage of DSHEA. So it was an arbitrary date in time. But if you were on the market at that point, the ingredients were presumed to be safe, meaning that FDA has the burden to prove that they are not safe in order to remove the ingredient from the market. And the burden on the FDA is to show that there is a significant or unreasonable risk of injury or illness from the use of the supplement. New ingredients, however, those things that would come onto the market after 1994, placed a burden on the manufacturer to notify FDA 75 days before they began marketing that new ingredient. And in that notification, the manufacturer had to tell FDA why it had a reasonable expectation that that ingredient would be safe as it was intended to be used in the product. So the standard for getting onto the market with a new dietary ingredient in the statute has always been that you reasonably expect it to be safe. Now, DSHEA left a lot of details to the FDA as to determine what was new, what was not new, and what kind of science was going to be required in order to demonstrate that level of safety, to show a reasonable expectation. Well, I'm going to skip this slide. I put this in here just for your reference if you want to refer back to it. This is, in fact, the language of the statute if you want to look at it word for word. But so what's happened in the last 17 years? Well, over that time, FDA has acknowledged 162 NDI notifications. Now, what that means is that of the notifications that have been filed with FDA, they have sent back a no objection letter in 162 cases. Now, what's interesting, and this will become important later, is that just because you get a no objection letter from FDA, that does not mean that you can say that FDA has declared your product to be safe. FDA specifically says in the letter that it is not a determination of safety. It just means that they are not objecting to your data, and it holds out the possibility that if they came across evidence in the future that they could try to remove the product from the market. But so, not a real good track record. If you see that chart there on the right, the purple bars represent the number of objections FDA has filed for companies, and the blue bars are those where the notification has been acknowledged. So 450 versus 162 is not a real good track record for the industry. FDA also is now saying that there have been thousands of new products a year, and many of them containing new dietary ingredients, much more ingredients than they have received notifications. And yet at the same time, if we look at where the FDA has put its enforcement activity, in those 17 years, FDA has only issued one warning letter for failing to file an NDI notice. And that was with regard to androstenedione at the time that our Drug Enforcement Administration was attempting to schedule andro as a controlled substance. And so it was an effort to, kind of pile on to what was already going on at DEA. And the agency has never brought an enforcement action against a company. So what we have is we have a bad track record for getting notifications approved by the agency, and yet not a lot of attention to the companies that do not file their NDIs and just go to market. So against that backdrop, the industry has been asking FDA for a guidance document that would give it some clarification as to what was expected. But of course, you have to be careful what you wish for. Sometimes you get it. So in July of this year, we got a guidance document. And unfortunately, it looks a lot like what FDA does in the area of food additives. Prior to DSHEA, FDA had tried to regulate supplements as food additives, and Congress had rejected that approach. And now what we're seeing is many of the same standards of safety that FDA would require for a food additive, it is now attempting to impose on the dietary ingredient notification process. But as I mentioned earlier, a notification to FDA does not give you a blessing of safety from the agency, unlike the food safety process, where if you pass that process, you can tell your consumers that this has been declared to be safe by the agency. So we have two issues here. One is, how are they defining the boundaries between old ingredients and new ingredients? And then secondly, if you are a new ingredient, what are the standards of safety that you have to meet? Now, we do have to, as a cautionary note, it is simply a guidance document, meaning it does not have the force of law. It is simply a document that illustrates FDA's current thinking on a topic. And that, in some ways, makes it even more difficult to fight because it does not confer any legal rights on the industry so that you can sue based on the document. But it is open. It's in draft. There is an opportunity for industry to comment. CRN will be responding on behalf of our members, and many of our companies will be responding individually. So the last thing I want to do is go through about 5 areas that we see that are particularly problematic with the guidance document. The first is that FDA uses this document to talk about something that really has nothing to do with new dietary ingredients anyway, but defines the line as to what may be a legitimate dietary ingredient. In the document, FDA says that a synthetic version of a botanical ingredient cannot be a legitimate dietary ingredient. So this is not even a question of safety. This is just a definitional argument that FDA has put out there. Their position is that if you are a synthetic version, then you were never part of the plant, and therefore you cannot be a constituent of the plant or an extract of the plant if you were never part of it. And industry strongly opposes this view. We know that we have protection, absolute statutory protection, for synthetic vitamins, and we believe that that should extend to synthetic versions of botanical ingredients as well. As many of you know, there are lots of reasons why companies might use a bioidentical synthetic in lieu of harvesting the ingredient directly from the plant. Due to soil variations and potential contaminants, you would get a more uniform, consistent product if you're using a synthetic version. It might be more, environmentally sustainable rather than harvesting all of those plants, and it may also be commercially viable. So there might be some economic reasons why you would want to make the ingredient in a lab as opposed to extracting it from a plant. But if this document stands, then that would be FDA's position that synthetic versions of botanicals are not allowed in supplements. The second issue that's concerning to industry is putting the burden of proof onto manufacturers with regard to proving that you are an old ingredient. So the statute says that if you're marketed prior to 94, you're an old ingredient, but it's less than clear who has the burden to prove that. And now FDA says that not only is that burden on the industry to prove that you were on the market prior to 94, but you also must do that with some sort of physical evidence. So you must have sales catalogs, invoices, receipts, other kinds of written documents that prove that you're on the market. Many companies have long since destroyed their old paper records because of their document retention policies. So this is making it very hard 17 years later to go back and prove that you were on the market. And in particular, if you're a newcomer to the industry and you were not even in existence prior to 94, it will be incredibly difficult for you to prove that your ingredient was in fact sold by somebody else with physical evidence prior to October 1994. The third area that concerns us is that they're changing their views on manufacturing, even so to the point that if you are a new dietary ingredient, if you are changing the manufacturing processes from what you were using in 1994. So even though you may think you're an old ingredient, if you've changed the method of extraction, if you've changed the concentration of the ingredient since 1994, which many companies have, that ingredient that's on the market now will be considered to be new by FDA. And what that would do is create a backlog here in the U.S., similar to the kinds of backlogs that many of you have experienced in Canada, if all of those ingredients that were presumed to be old are suddenly declared to be new ingredients, and we have to go through this notification process for all of these ingredients that have been on the market with a long track record of safety, and suddenly they're subject to a new regulatory system. Fourth is, and this is particularly concerning to many in the industry, is FDA also says in its guidance that it believes that the notification process applies to every product that contains a new dietary ingredient, not just an initial determination for the ingredient itself. Industry has long read the statute to mean that the ingredient supplier can go file their notification for an NDI with the agency, And if it's not objected to, then the supplier can use that with all of its customers and market the fact that it is in possession of a non-objection letter, and ingredient suppliers can then license it to their manufacturers, who can then put it into their products without having to go back to the agency. FDA's view now is that each manufacturer would need to go back to the agency for a separate notification depending on how they're using the ingredient. We believe this adds a lot of cost to the industry. It creates more backlog and results in a lot of repetitious filings with the agency for very similar, if not identical, products using the same ingredients. Fifth is the amount of science. So up till now, what we've been looking at is the ways that FDA is using this guidance document to take the burdens of who has to prove safety and put more and more of the burden on the industry. What compounds that even more is not who has the burden, but how much of a burden that they must shoulder. And this fifth issue deals with what is the safety standard. If you assume you have a responsibility to file your NDI, what must you prove to the agency? Now, the statutory requirement is a reasonable expectation of safety. If you are bringing a new food additive to market, then the requirement is a reasonable assurance of no harm. We believe that those words were used differently in the context of the statute because Congress meant two different things. Over the last 20 years, FDA has developed something called the Red Book for food additives, and it is the authoritative book for demonstrating safety of food additives, not dietary ingredients. The guidance document that was issued in July takes the opportunity to apply those standards to new dietary ingredients as well. In many cases, it would require multi-generational studies and studies that look at the use of the ingredient up to 1,000 times the expected dosage. Now, since dietary ingredients are often used because they are intended to have a biological effect on the body, unlike a food additive that might be there only for some sort of food preservative use, we're very much concerned about what this could do to the likelihood of being able to satisfy FDA safety standards. So we believe that these standards are unreasonable because they put too high a threshold on the industry with very little protection for companies. And as I started this conversation, even if you meet those requirements, you would still get a letter back from FDA saying that this is not a finding that your ingredient is safe. So lastly, I think, we can look at this draft guidance as a collection of efforts on behalf of the FDA to rebalance the burdens. It is a way to take many products that we thought were old ingredients that have a wide history of safety and to categorize those as new ingredients. Once put into that category, they would be held to a very high standard of safety akin to a food additive, and certainly not what DSHEA intended when the law was passed. Because of that, we think that it will stifle development, it will limit innovation, it will punish innovation since '94, where companies may have changed their manufacturing processes since that time. And we think in the long run it will hurt consumers, as some ingredients might not be able to meet those standards and would have to be removed from the market. So briefly, what happens next? Well, the industry has until December 2nd to file comments. We're very hopeful that FDA will listen, and this will be a constructive dialogue between the agency and the industry. If it is not, there are certainly legislative and judicial options that are available, but as I mentioned earlier, because this is a guidance document, there is no ability to bring a legal action against the agency until they, in fact, enforce those interpretations against a particular company, and that would then create standing for a lawsuit. So in the meantime, we may see FDA trying to enforce these based on these views, and we'll be watching to see if these controversial opinions in the document find their way into any kind of enforcement actions. CRN is responding, of course, for the industry. Our members have received our analysis. We've sent out a number of briefings to companies that are members of CRN explaining the document in detail and how we intend to respond. We had a webinar in September that included 2 officials from FDA as well as 2 officials from industry that examined the document from both sides. and we'll be exploring lots of alternatives down the road in case our comments to FDA don't succeed in changing the agency's mind. So I would invite you to enjoy, check our website and join us in this endeavor to try to convince FDA that perhaps they overreached in the initial draft guidance and that there's still opportunity to get it right. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you very much, Steve. That was a very thorough summary of the key issues on this matter. I know ourselves at Dicentra, we've also issued a position statement on this to the FDA in support. Now, I'd like to thank everyone again for participating in today's webinar. Please don't forget to complete the survey so we can continue to improve on this educational service. Also, please feel free to contact us if you have any questions regarding regulatory and scientific matters impacting your business. Our next regulatory update webinar will take place on Tuesday, December 6th, 2011, and we hope you can join us then. So from our team at Dicentra to you, please stay happy and stay healthy. Thank you again.